Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is a game that has the player actively discovering not just the world around them as they play, but also gives a large part of screen time to discovering the party members around them, their motivations, their fears, their hopes and dreams, all along a journey to put an end to the bloodless guillotine cursing the citizens of Lumiere, the paintress, and the yearly gommage. There will be massive spoilers discussed in this video going forward. As with any game or other story I cover, I highly encourage you to go and experience it first for yourself, then come back and explore some other thoughts and interpretations. But form your own ideas first. The developers have been very clear about not divulging too much in order to let the players decide for themselves. So please, if you haven't played Expedition 33 yet, please do yourself the favor and set aside the time to play it. Please. There will also be discussions of heavier topics throughout this video, and I promise to handle them responsibly, but they are facets of the story we're discussing today. If you struggle at all with these subjects, consider a different topic for now. And if you are at all interested, there are links to resources listed in the description below. We all need help sometimes, and that's perfectly human. With all that said, I do very much look forward to sharing this discussion with you today. As it turns out, existentialism was a main focus for me in school, and even more coincidentally, specifically the French influence on the philosophy's growth and definition. Clair Obscur Expedition 33 was a true delight, not just as a gamer, but as a philosophy student. There is no denying how terribly fun it was to romp through a mystical land, fighting fearsome enemies, befriending strange and funny creatures, honing spells and abilities that change how you face the world in front of you. But my real fascination with this game came from how it presented the psychological and philosophical themes present in the story. Even more, it had woven these themes into deeply connected interpersonal relationships, allowing the supporting characters actual depth instead of resorting to using simple, hard archetypes. One thing I thought the game did very well was presenting complex situations or concepts and just leaving them for the player to sit with it, not offering an immediate resolution like some stories may feel the need to do. There is something nice about the game trusting the player to marinate in the conflict and come to their own conclusions. There is, of course, the main decision at the end, which forces the players to pick a side of a difficult choice. However, the focus of today's video will be more on the characters of the story and the lives they lead up to and during the events of Clair Obscur. From the very beginning of the game, we're dropped into learning about the backstory of our characters, being offered a veritable gambit of different social interactions for Gustav to respond and interact with. This depth of a crash course is important because by knowing Gustav's ideals, motivations, fears, etc., we can transpose the context of that into his interactions with the rest of the party, and further on when the party has to go on without him. I'm not as versed in psychology as philosophy, so I'm not familiar with a simple term for this contextual knowledge. But if you've ever suddenly thought someone made a lot more sense after meeting their family and friends, that's a bit of a hint of what I'm talking about. Our point of discussion today is the idea of existentialism, specifically a term known as the absurd, and how it pertains to the canvas world. We won't be touching on the still debated topic of which ending was any better. Instead, I'd like to think of this as more of a thought experiment, an exercise of some philosophical tools I'd like to share with you all. I've used the word a couple times already, but let's double back and establish some basis of explanation. The more succinct of the official definition offerers comes from Merriam-Webster. A chiefly 20th century philosophical movement embracing diverse doctrines, but centering on analysis of individual existence in an unfathomable universe, and the plight of the individual who must assume ultimate responsibility for acts of free will without any certain knowledge of what is right or wrong or good or bad. Good definition. A bit dense for our conversation, though. In my own words, if I may, existentialism is the field of philosophy that deals with the experience of carving out one's own definition in a world which offers no inherent meaning. The Belle Epoque era in which Clair Obscur is placed was home to philosophies more focused on religious doctrine or emerging natural sciences, while existentialism wouldn't be coined as a term till 1943 by Marcel. But, as the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy states, only Sartre and Beauvoir explicitly self-identified as existentialists. The ideas had been fermenting for a while in different writings of authors across the world. Given the themes we'll discuss in a moment, and the fact that the era leads into the general birth of existentialism, I say close enough to study. In an effort to keep this video focused on Clair Obscur and not morph it into a philosophy lecture, I have chosen to pull from two sources only. Albert Camus' collection of essays titled The Myth of Sisyphus, as well as Jean-Paul Sartre's lecture titled Existentialism is a Humanism. However, if any of this is intriguing to you, I've provided some other names as well in the description to get you off and running down any number of rabbit holes. One other term to discuss that will lead us into our main topic is the concept of the absurd. It can be thought of as a term used to denote the lack of any a priori essence contributing to our existence. Or maybe, there is no inherent meaning infused to existence. Shorter still. Life is what you make it. The people of Lumiere, however, were conceived first as a thought, then given life. It would seem then that I'm suggesting they are in fact not existentially human. But I contend that this is merely a limitation of the founding of existentialism, not a limitation of its ideals. At the time, society was only just beginning to explore the concept of man without his divine father. The idea of multi-layered dimensions with intelligent beings was still largely relegated to the halls of myth and fantasy, if at all. Let's use that to restructure this thought experiment to something more relatable. If humanity were to discover the existence of not a divine God, but rather fourth-dimensional beings, would humanity simply give up existing? These beings are capable of affecting our world, giving creation to life and simply snapping it out of existence. But even so, they are fallible. They are as emotionally driven as humans, if not more so in the case of Clair Obscur. They can be wrong and even fight amongst each other. Despite all their power, they are not gods. Would humanity simply give up after learning they have no path out of their newly understood limited existence? I can't answer that for anyone else, but I know personally, as someone who has long believed in the absurd of life, I'm inclined to think I would still continue, albeit differently, I'm sure. How then would Sartre or Camus deal with the given examples of Clair Obscur? An entire world, provably a case of essence preceding existence. Part of why I chose these particular works to refer to, they are styled as responses to critiques and criticisms of the ideas of existentialism. Not only are we offered the concepts the authors thought most important, but also the questions they thought most valuable. By seeing the main points that they return to again and again, there is a better structure to extrapolate ideas from, rather than pulling from the more typical one-sided thesis-style paper, essentially just proselytizing their ideas. Camus discusses in his Sisyphus essays the idea of the absurd and how we engage with it on a personal level, largely focusing on the personal viewpoints that arise from coming to terms with the gravitas of an existence devoid of natural meaning. Sciel is a walking allegory for these ideas, having reached incredible levels of despair, as well as radiant conviction of purpose. When Painted Verso asks her to elaborate how death is a friend, she explains that she's known it her whole life, embracing her friends and family alike, and knows that one day it will welcome her home. However, we learn this resolution did not come to her easily. Sartre, during his lecture, details the terrifying freedom which the absurd implies. Any choice made is a decision against all other choices. Even those feeling the weight and pressure of generational expectation, they may discover this is a false cage thrust upon them. Doubtless, there will be reactions, consequences, even repercussions. But no threat of violence, claim of ownership, blackmail, or duress may ever take away the ability to make a choice. Lune embodies this path of discovery, having been born to parents who, while they may have loved her in their own way, clearly had expectations for their child before Lune was even born. By the end of the story, we see her come to terms with this and finally detach herself from that weight. As stated in the beginning, I'll not be touching on the moral implications of the canvas world or the ending choices anyone may have made. It may seem surprising to not discuss morality while having such open talks about the meaninglessness of life and the choices we make in the face of that light. But, in fact, both authors offered similarly clear responses to the questions of morality in existentialism. So, I'll let them explain. Camus writes in counter, "The absurd does not liberate, it binds. It does not authorize all actions. Everything is permitted does not mean that nothing is forbidden. The freedom of choice is not a moral implication, but simply a state of nature." Sartre describes the moral criticisms as not very serious objections, going on to respond by stating, "In one sense, choice is possible. But what is not possible is not to choose. I can always choose, but I must know that if I do not choose, that is still a choice." Again, the idea that man is bound to freedom of choice is a state of existence, not a moral implication. What I would like to discuss, and why I've brought up the concept of the absurd, is the way we see the inhabitants of the canvas grapple with their existence. We're offered three fairly distinct groups of perspective into this, and those are the painted family, Lune and Sciel, and Maelle. Maelle offers the viewer a more omniscient view of her experience. And we also get front row seats to Lune and Sciel's development. But unfortunately, we're largely left picking up the pieces to the story of the painted family. Our expedition teammates have significantly different stories from each other. Lune, struggling to live up to but also distance herself from the expectations of her parents, while Sciel has found a new strength in her life after so much loss and grief. Even when it comes to discovering the nature of the canvas, they have pretty different reactions. Sciel immediately readjusts her worldview to suit her desires, and Lune views it as a whole new field of exploration and study. As for all the citizens of Lumiere, I'll explain my position a bit. It's clear that they enjoy free will within the laws of the canvas. If they were simply puppets of their creator Aline, then it would be unlikely that they'd be able to carry on in their normal capacities after the rupture and Renoir and Aline's continued stalemate. And while it is reasonable to believe that Aline imbued the people of Lumiere with the knowledge she had of how society works and of basic biology to continue populating without direct intervention, there are some inventions we hear about, like the aqua farms, that seem way out of her scope of knowledge. Then there's the Lumina converter, a wholly Lumiere invention, conceived of outside of any possible direct intervention from a Descendre member, but scientifically within the laws of the canvas world. The evidence points to this world being entirely real for its inhabitants. It's only the painters, the real Descendre family, that give context to a reality above theirs. We are introduced to Lune and Sciel fleetingly in the opening Gomage ceremony, but it's not really till after the expedition launches that we're properly introduced. I think it's fitting that Lune is introduced to us during a moment of intense emotional stress, where we can see her defining rationality cut coolly through to keep on moving. Sciel, on the other hand, is introduced to the player during a moment of relative downtime. Sciel has been isolated this whole time, having believed to have lost everyone. Again. And yet, here we find her, making the best of it. Lune was raised in an environment where her path was always set out. Expectations clear and defined. Before she was born, her parents had long decided her purpose for her: to continue their life's work when they were gone. Indeed, even when we recover their expedition journal, it reveals Lune's mother felt at ease knowing that her daughter carried on after her. It's bittersweet for Lune, knowing in the last moments that her mother did think of her, but it was as the means to an end that she always was to her mother. It's why Lune joined the expeditioners in the first place. It was more than her duty. It was her purpose. But out here, in the fractured lands of the canvas with the dimensional truth of her existence laid bare, she struggles to find the same force of conviction. In our continued conversations at camp, she reveals that she didn't know why she kept going, but that she knew running away wouldn't solve it either. After discovering the truth of the canvas, she renews her convictions to a rational way of life. We even see her begin to explore the idea of a layered existence with Maelle. Sciel had a very different life, finding a passion for helping those around her, landing her with a job at an aqua farm for the city. And it was among this working passion that she found a love in a man named Pierre, a wonderful capstone to the meaningful existence she carved out for herself. That is, till the day an accident took Pierre, years earlier than the Gomage they were all destined for. It seemed especially cruel that in a world where everyone was fated to shorter and shorter lives, to have it ripped away even earlier by an accident. Unfortunately, this was to only be the beginning of her grief. In a failed attempt to end things after Pierre's death, Sciel was mysteriously saved at the last moment. However, unknown to Sciel at the time, she had been pregnant and the attempt had been too traumatic, losing the baby. The gravity of her situation weighed heavily on her for a time, till she eventually began taking up teaching the students that her husband had been mentoring. As Sciel began to climb her way back from grief, she reached a realization that she was going to continue to use her time to help people of Lumiere. She had tried death, and it didn't seem to want her yet, so there was no point in forcing the issue. Tomorrow would come, and it would do so with her help. In the scene where they are erased by Renoir's shockwave Gomage, Sciel simply closes her eyes and embraces it, much as she said she would. Lune, however, is frantically searching for something, anything, when Maelle later brings them back at camp. Lune almost immediately begins taking stock of the situation, interrogating both Maelle and Painted Verso. But all Sciel wants to know is if Maelle can bring back other people they've lost. Lune is trying to make up the lost ground of information that led to her being gommaged. Sciel has her memories intact enough to realize she didn't meet Pierre and their child after the gommage like she wanted. But she did come back. So she is singularly focused in bringing them back. Even telling Painted Verso she can empathize with his deceit, as now she too would do anything to achieve her goals. Meeting real Renoir, they both attempt to convince him to leave the canvas, but again, in their own way. Lune appeals to the weight of the choices parents make for their children. Sciel speaks about grief and how it blinds us to the choices we're making. Both points Renoir readily acknowledges, but his own grief-driven goals are unaffected. Lune's arc is one of generational expectations and how we define ourselves within and without it. Sciel's arc is one of personal choice in the face of day-to-day realities and the convictions we carry through them. Sartre writes of generational expectations by way of a thought experiment. Imagine a family in an occupied country, an elderly mother and a son just coming into adulthood. What is the boy to do? It seems there is a sense of duty to repel the occupying forces, to improve the lives of your fellow countrymen and remove the heel of oppression. Then, there seems a sense of family. The need to support an ailing family member, indeed, the very one who gave you life. To go to war would be to condemn his mother not just to the ailments of age, but the grief of having a child off at war. To stay and aid his mother would signal his mother's value over the lives of his countrymen, who in fact include other mothers with children of their own. But in reality, there is an infinite field of options for the boy to choose. Perhaps the boy is fond of books and simply decides to begin collecting books from around the world, only engaging with the war to go around a barricade to the next book. There is no inherent impetus to making any decision within the moment of that decision itself. A hero is not born a hero. A hero chooses to be a hero in the moment. Thus, a villain is not always a villain and can at any moment choose to be heroic. The boy can choose to collect books, and Lune can choose to channel her studious habits into a life of wonder and discovery. Camus discusses explicitly the concept of weighing continued existence against the complete lack of inherent meaning in his opening essay. He argues that it comes from our day-to-day experiences, what we choose to give value to, that tips the scales in favor of pressing onward. However, because we are creatures that are given to the habits of sustaining life before we unlock our tools for analysis, we cry for food or comfort before ever having a thought. It is all too easy to get caught up in the cycle of perpetuating life. It comes from a moment of lucidity, a pause in the pattern, when the pervasive why worms its way into the mind. Sometimes the cycle simply takes back over and the world returns to the way it was and always will be. Sometimes the person will engage with the worm and discover why it is they do what they do and either change or carry on as enlightened. But other times, unfortunately, people do not have the tools to understand the why, and worming its way into their heart, it festers. In this, Camus lamented that he found the word undermine to be a most accurate description of what happens to someone. The very structure of Sciel's happiness was undermined at its critical points. But through reflection, she discovered a new sense of purpose. Maelle is a special case. She existed in the world of the canvas as a citizen of Lumiere for 16 local years, then began to receive her memories as real Alicia, bit by bit, without real context. Upon learning the full truth of the canvas world and becoming my Alicia, she has the full memories of 2 different 16-year-old experiences logged away. It seems to me less that she'd have the wisdom of 32 years of life, having lived each of the 16 years without the knowledge of the other 16. Indeed, at the end, she seems to separate the 2 existences, leaving the life of Alicia behind, as she already viewed it as a husk. And now she has what she views as a convenient new shell. Deciphering the painted family is like a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces, stuffed inside of a can of worms and kicked into a nest of snakes. There is no singular coherent through line for any of them. The closest we get is painted Verso, and he's a quintessential unreliable narrator. What we've deduced has been pieced together by bits of information given by the different family members about each other, deduced from song lyrics and other world-building elements. What we do know, however, is the story is a very tragic one for all involved. The painted family seems to have only discovered the world beyond the canvas when real Renoir began trying to get Lean to come back. Though painted Alicia may be a separate case that we'll come back to at the end, painted Claire and painted Verso seem to have been integrated comfortably with the people of Lumiere. And while we don't know for sure, there are journal entries that talk about a painter's council, so it's easy to assume Aline, if not also painted Renoir, served on that council. Painted Renoir was created by Aline, lashing out against her husband, forming him not as Renoir himself, but as a weary man, carrying the loss of a son who was never his own, and a wife who resented him down to a subconscious level. For much of the game, we view painted Renoir as a sort of baseless villain, simply protecting their boss. But by the end, it's revealed that he actually viewed the painted family as separate, wanting to leave the Desandre's shadow behind. Verso was never painted Renoir's son, but the painted family could choose to be their own family. Painted Clea reveals very little about herself, but we learn pieces of her life from journals and painted Verso. It seems painted Clea had a largely normal life in Lumiere, even falling in love with a man named Simon. However, when Clea herself came into the canvas and saw this representation of her, she doomed painted Clea to tragedy. Not being able to outright kill painted Clea, the real Clea resorted to painting over her, consuming her identity to a shell of a being, forced to create the very nevrons that would lead to the destruction of her world. When the party beats back her power enough for the smallest sliver of consciousness to eke out, she immediately makes the choice for herself, proving that the painted family may not be as immortal as previously thought. Painted Clea detonates herself, spreading her chroma like ashes to the wind. Despite being enslaved, she made a choice. Painted Verso's story is steeped in ironic tragedy. His entire existence is based on fulfilling this performance of someone he's never met. Aline wanted to have a version of her son around again, but she didn't care about the fact that Painted Verso would be his own person. Despite filling him with all the ideals she loved about her son, Painted Verso would inevitably change and grow as he met circumstances that the real Verso never engaged with. In order to keep Aline happy, he would have had to continually repress himself to stay in line with his mother's wants. In addition to that, he'd have to live every day with the weight of knowing the entirety of Lumiere only exists because of the loss of real Verso. Upsetting the status quo wouldn't mean just angering a local council member, but risking the rage of an emotionally unstable higher dimensional being at risk of your entire population. It seems he was willing to play this part till the real Renoir and ultimately real Claire entered the canvas, disrupting his worldview even further. He chooses to end the canvas, seeing it as a pointless cycle of suffering perpetuated by grief. However, in my opinion, it is Painted Alicia that suffers the worst fate. Born into existence, already punished for a tragedy she not only didn't cause, but could have been entirely removed from. There is no reason for Painted Alicia to bear the scars of the Manor fire, other than Aline's petulant sense of punishment. Painted Alicia could have been created in exactly the same perfect representation of her other children. But instead, Aline's emotions are in control, and she made Painted Alicia as an outcast. Not just the scars, but she stood out like no one or no thing else in the world. While Painted Verso had to live up to a role, Painted Alicia could never escape from under the role she was given. Every moment of her life was a reminder of her own mother's hatred for her. There are some moments in the story where it can be a bit confusing to tell Painted Alicia's motivations for her actions, but I think they can be explained as a victim of abuse. We first see Painted Alicia with Painted Renoir, furious at real Alicia for being within the canvas. Not surprising, as in her eyes, real Alicia is the reason why Painted Alicia has to bear her living torture. Then we see her appear with the paintress at the manor door, even draping her arms over the paintress's shoulder. This was the most confusing scene for me, till I realized again how this must look to Painted Alicia in the moment. She knows the truth of the canvas, and she's starting to see the possibility of Painted Verso and Expedition 33 actually completing their mission of ejecting Aline and destroying the canvas. Despite how she's been treated by her mother, she's otherwise staring down oblivion. In the end, however, when we meet her again at the top of the Reacher, she's reached a state of peace with this. She's choosing an end to perpetuating her part in Aline's immortal cycle for a mortal life. To him who simply thus recounts the morning's pleasures, or fate dooms ere long the scene must close to ope on him no more. Yet morning unrepining still, he'll greet thy beams awhile, and surely thou, when o'er his grave solemn the whispering willows wave, wilt sweetly on him smile. and the pale glowworm's pensive light will guide his ghostly walks in the dreary, moonless night. In conclusion, the people of the canvas, citizens of Lumiere and painted family alike, are indeed people. They may not be capital H humans, but they are conscious beings with their own sense of identity and worth. Despite the purpose for which they were created, they all, individually, display an ability to be their own selves and lead their own lives, full of choices, right or wrong, just like people do. Thank you. I hope this gives you some food for thought or inspires you to make another playthrough of the game. I've personally enjoyed every minute of the game so far. I just got into this game a month and a half ago, and I currently have 190 hours playtime. There's just so much game in this game. If you have any thoughts on this video or any ideas on the game that you want to share, I'd love to hear it. Civil discussion is always encouraged. A special thank you to Sandfall Interactive and Kepler Interactive. In the modern climate of video games, I was not expecting to get to crack open my old college books. You've made a wonderful world and presented it in a beautiful way. It's nice to have such a complex story and be trusted to be mature enough to just sit in it without having a resolution stuffed in our face. I loved every minute of it, and I'm so excited for the next adventure whenever you decide it's ready. Thank you so much for hanging out. Have a good one.